Okay, first of all, Nick Thorley, my first question is how did you end up becoming a Stoke fan? Is it something you were born with, or what's your Stoke story essentially?
Well, it's a slightly interesting story which I've never fully publicly confessed. So I kind of was born into a Stoke supporting family in that my mum and dad both went to Stoke in the 70s and probably before that as well, but gradually sort of, I don't know exactly why, but kind of stopped going. So they were there for kind of the Stanley Matthews era and the glory days and everything, and the FA Cup semi-finals. But when I was growing up, there wasn't much interest in it, and Stoke were kind of languishing. And I actually only got into football properly in 1990 in the World Cup in Italy. And prior to that, my next door neighbour was a bit of a Liverpool fan, who subsequently became a Sheffield Wednesday supporter because that's where he was from. And when they started having a bit of success, he rediscovered his roots. But in the late 80s, I used to watch a bit of football with him. I remember watching the Coventry Spurs Cup final that Coventry won. But I actually decided to become an Arsenal fan in, was it 1989, when Arsenal famously beat Liverpool in the last match of the season. And so for a couple of years, I have to confess that I was an Arsenal fan, and it even had one of those awful yellow and black Arsenal tops that kind of looked a bit like someone had been sick. And it wasn't until the success under Lou Macari that I started following Stoke. So it was actually the season we won the Autoglass Trophy was the season I started to listen to a few Stoke matches on the radio. I remember listening to the semi-finals, both of the playoffs and the Autoglass Trophy. And I remember listening to the Autoglass Trophy final when Mark Stein scored against Stockport whilst doing a Duke of Edinburgh practice walk for my bronze D.A.V. And so then the following season I went to my first match because a family friend, so not even my mum and dad, much to their shame, a family friend sort of discovered that I was taking an interest, and he took me one night to watch my first ever match, which was in the 92-93 season against Brighton and Hove Albion, when Lee Sanford scored in the first minute. And then my second match was a few weeks later, or I don't know, a month or two later, when we played the Vale in one of the first Potteries derbies for years and years and years, and we won 2-1. And Mark Stein scored the winner from the penalty spot after Stoke were 1-0 down. And both times when Stoke scored, I remember literally being lifted off my feet and sort of moved around in midair in the boothing end. So and then there was no looking back from there. Halfway through that season, my dad started coming to Stoke again, and we pretty much went to every match the second half of that season, me and my dad. And then my sister came on the last match of the season when we beat Plymouth. Well, it wasn't the last match, I think it was the penultimate match of the season at home when we beat Plymouth against Peter Shilton, who was there. I think he was their player manager. He was in goal, and we won 1-0 and won the championship. And from then on, I had a season ticket up until I left home for university.
Yeah. I'm just stunned by the fact you confessed to supporting Arsenal.
Yeah, don't tell anyone.
Yeah. You say the kit looked like sick, but I think all Arsenal kits look like sick.
Yeah, do you think?
Really, but,
yeah.
We'll forgive the follies of youth then.
Thank you.
And one thing listening to the Pottermouth documentary on Radio Stoke is that it mentions the fact that you're registered blind and you follow a lot of Stoke games through the radio now. I mean, how long has that been the case?
Yeah, so I was partially sighted when I was younger, so I could see a little bit. Well, I could see, but I just couldn't see in much detail. So up until I was 15, I suppose in a lot of ways I was just like a normal kid in that I didn't, you wouldn't have known, apart from having pretty thick glasses, you wouldn't have known necessarily that there was anything wrong with my eyesight. I was quite clumsy. I had tunnel vision, struggled with ball sports, had to sit at the front of the class, had special thick lined paper to write on and read with a magnifying glass. But I went to mainstream school and all that kind of stuff, and I used to be able to see when I went to the matches. So I used to be able to see like pretty much everything that was going on. I used to stand in the boothing end, and I used to be able to see that half of the pitch nearest to me. But yeah, I guess partly because in those days it was the only way you could follow Stoke if you weren't at the match, was listening to the games. And there was just something about radio. I've just always really enjoyed radio commentary. I don't know whether it's more kind of passionate, and the atmosphere is, you get more kind of caught up in it, but probably to start with it was just the fact that that was the only way to follow Stoke. So yeah, like listening to matches has always been a kind of inherent part of my supporter journey.
And what's a kind of typical match day for you now then? Do you go every week? Do you try and go along when you can? I mean, it's not been the best couple of seasons to be following us, but how have you kind of kept in touch?
Yeah, it's kind of changed quite a lot over the years. So I guess for the last, my then wife and I adopted children 4 years ago almost, and that was when I stopped having a season ticket. So I'd stopped having one when I went to uni, and then trying to remember when it was, like early on when Pulis came back the second time, was it, when he did they did that pledge thing to try and get 10,000 season tickets. That's when I got a season ticket again and started going all the time. And then it was a bit more sporadic when I got married. And then when we adopted, it was kind of knew then that I wouldn't be able to go every week because it's a bit of a trek, especially when you're relying on going on the train and stuff from Nottingham. So at the moment, my match days are very kind of depends on whether I have my kids or not. So, and it kind of depends on what we're doing. So what I often do, if I'm not able to listen to the match live, I'll often record it and sort of turn my phone off and avoid hearing the result. And then I'll always listen to the match then in full without knowing the result sort of early in the evening when the kids are in bed, or if I've dropped them back with their mum. So yeah, so that's how I do it. So it's all by the radio. Apart from I went to the Palace match, and apart from that, I went to the Man United match at the start of the season when things seemed as though it was all going to be very positive. So yeah, for the last couple of years, I've only been to like literally 1 or 2 games a season.
Yeah, that's probably been for the best as well.
given
the performances on the pitch, but. So yeah, how are you feeling about kind of the summer? Like, are you looking forward to the Championship? How do you feel about Gary Rowett?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited actually. Like, I don't know if we're all just, or if I'm kidding myself along, but I'm quite excited because I kept saying this to people, like in the early days after relegation, kind of saying, like, what's not to like in the Championship? More matches, more wins, hopefully, more local derbies. So I kind of, I feel pretty positive, and especially now that we've got Rowett. Where I went to school in Uttoxeter, so I didn't really know many Vale fans. I knew lots of Derby fans and Wolves fans, and obviously the Man United fans and etc. But in terms of local clubs, it was all kind of Derby and Wolves really. So the fact that we have been in a division above Derby for ages has been great. I was very relieved that they didn't get promoted, and now that we've got their manager is great. And the fact that it's a bit of a no-brainer for him to come to a club with much more money, and having like I think Derby's chairman said he wasn't going to put any more money in, and they'd have to start selling some of their players and everything. So that's all very nice. So, and I think he's young and he's hungry, and nothing's for sure, but I'm feeling relatively optimistic and excited about the season.
Yeah, I think that's been the overriding feeling of just positivity. Obviously, massive amounts of caution in there because it's Stoke, and we know Stoke don't do things the easy way, but it's nice to feel some positivity after the last couple
definitely. And also I think there's a bit of like caution around. I work with I've got a couple of friends who are Derby fans, and they've been, I think he's done well there, and I think if they're honest, they're sad to see him go, but it's not been like, obviously they missed out on promotion, all that kind of stuff, and they had a bit of a rocky patch February and March, so it's not like he's been absolutely unbelievable, but so like you say, cautious optimism, I think.
So to get on track with kind of the Pottermouth story and how stunned I was by the kind of the revelation, I think towards the end of last season that you were Pottermouth. What kind of amazed me when I heard the story is I knew who you were kind of when you were kind of revealed as Pottermouth, because some years ago, I think it was just after we got promotion, so first season, second season in the Premier League, you were the presenter of to my memory, the first ever Stoke City podcast.
That's right, the first ever one.
Called Stoke City, etc. How did that come about, that podcast? Because it was definitely a huge kind of inspiration for this podcast, and it was kind of in those early days where podcasts weren't as perhaps big as they are now, and to have a Stoke one for me was an amazing thing to listen to. So how did that get up and running?
No, it's great. That's really great to hear. I started doing it because in the summer after we got promoted, I heard a documentary on 5 Live that Colin Murray did called For the Love of Pod, and it was just an hour, and he talked about this phenomenon that was podcasting. And I'd like listened to some podcasts, and I was kind of interested in it, but in the show they sort of talked about podcasting and the whole kind of, that anyone could do it and everything, and they had some it was kind of a real mix of some highbrow stuff, and they had a couple of people who were on the show kind of chatting to him as well as other contributors, and at the end of the show he just asked them for what their favourite podcast was, and one of them said that their favourite podcast was the Spurs Show, and it just made me think, I wonder if like it just, I've always been interested in, as well as like listening to the radio and everything, I've always fancied I used to want to like present on radio and stuff like that, and I've always been into doing, from being a kid, like recording myself doing things, and when I was older kind of recording myself doing slightly more funny things or recording other people. So I just had that idea, and I just thought it'd be cool if we could do something that would be like sort of in some ways light-hearted and in some ways like slightly humorous, but also just thought, what if we could get like really good guests on it, and people you've heard of. So I remember that summer, I think was it the Euros? It was the Euros when we weren't in it, wasn't it? And I just remember while they were on, just like emailing loads of people. Like I found, I can't remember, maybe it was through emailing someone at Radio Stoke or something. I realised that a lot of presenters and commentators and things there was like this formulaic BBC email address, so I just randomly emailed loads of people, and I got loads of replies, like quite positive replies, people saying I was just saying, we're starting this podcast, it's about Stoke, and wondered if at some point in the season, if and when you commentate on Stoke, would you come on our show? And people replied very positively, like Mike Ingham, who was then the BBC football correspondent, John Murray, who went on to become the BBC football correspondent. There was someone I'd met once by kind of a long story, but I ended up sitting next to Nigel Johnson once in the commentary box I'm trying to think, it would be our first season at the Britannia, and there was someone who was covering the match who I chatted to, who was a Stoke fan, and now his name's John Southall, and he's like a producer on Five Live. So I got in touch with him as well, and he said he could put me in touch with different commentators. And and it was all, and then I suppose the kind of momentum just went from there. And I sort of chatted to my mate Michael about whether he'd be up for being on it, because I thought it'd be a bit funny if he had like me as a Stoke fan, and then he's a Forest fan, so kind of someone, looking at it from a slightly different perspective. So so it all went from there, and it was great fun. We did it that season, and I think he did it for 2 or 3 seasons in the end, and then I got a different job, and I just had a lot less time during the day to sit around waiting for footballers to phone me back, and just became a lot less practical. That was the other thing I thought, as well as like famous commentators and like national broadcasters, we thought as well, if we could like interview former players, that would be good. And I also had the idea of always kind of reflecting on the last match with a journalist from the opposition sort of newspaper or radio, again, to get that different perspective. So it was great. I loved doing it. It was really good fun.
Yeah, that was kind of the one thing that amazes me, like thinking back to it, is just kind of the standard and quality of the guests you want to think. Like, you obviously had a load of current Stoke and then ex-Stoke players on there, and a load of journalists like Jeff Stelling, I think, was on it a couple of times, and you had Adrian Durham on when Adrian Durham was public enemy Stoke on Trent and all the rest of it. Yeah,
definitely. Well, it was. Go on, sorry.
No, you go.
It was always that idea of just getting anyone on, who was kind of famous, whether they were positive about Stoke or not. So Adrian Durham, like you say, who actually was, I remember most of the time we had him on, he was very sort of actually fairly complimentary, and he was always dead friendly whenever we spoke to him. Had him on 2 or 3 times over those seasons. Mick Dennis, who isn't, I don't hear him on the national media much. I think it's part. He used to be I don't know if he still is. He was the football correspondent for the Express, I think, and he used to be on Five Live a lot, on panels and those kind of things. And he was always very, very negative about Stoke, and he was very critical. Because that season we got promoted, I think we're the 16 changes of leadership in the Championship, and he was one who said that the quality was so poor that whoever got promoted would be going straight back down, and he described Stoke in very, very derogatory terms, but I kind of admired the way he always said what he thought, and he was all right when he was on. He wasn't like mega friendly or anything. I remember once him being very sarcastic. I think he was on the first show, and we'd arranged to speak to him, and it turned out to be at the same time that the fixtures had been released, and so he's a bit incredulous that we were talking to him rather than checking through the fixtures. But I don't know. I mean, we'd arranged with him the time we were going to speak, so there's nothing we could do about it. But so there was him. I think partly he's not on. I don't know if this is the reason, but I remember hearing him talking about the 2012 Olympics and saying what a disaster they were going to be just before they started. So maybe that's why he's not on the radio very much anymore. And Jeff Stelling was amazing. He was always incredibly friendly. And the time we had him on like 3 or 4 times, the time I really remember speaking to him and just thinking, oh my gosh, this bloke just can't do enough. He's just like so generous and everything. And I saw Michael the other day, and we were both laughing about this. We phoned him up, and he'd forgotten that we'd arranged to interview him, because we always had him on if we'd played, like we played Hartlepool in the Cup one time, and if we played Middlesbrough, if there was some vague northeast connection, it would be an excuse to get him on. And we phoned him up, and he was like, oh guys, sorry, I'm on holiday, I'm in Greece. And we're like, oh, right, okay, no worries, sorry to bother you. And he was like, no, it's fine. I'm just here with the family, but I'll just wander to a quiet place. And he said, oh, I'll be all right for 10 minutes. And he did the interview there, while he's on holiday with his family. It was bonkers. So yeah, they were just, and I think, because I don't know if how much of a thing this was, but when you could email other people saying, our guests, so would you be on our podcast so far this season? We've had Jeff Stelling, Jonathan Pearce, Lee Dixon, and Adrian Durham. I don't know, it kind of gives it a bit of, I think it helped a little bit. people were generally pretty friendly. I remember Darren Fletcher once sort of half shouting at me on the phone when I'd phoned him up asking for an interview after he'd kind of agreed to be on, and he was on a few times, but he was quite aggressive once when I spoke to him. And Darren Fletcher, as in the commentator on BT Sport, not the former Man United player. And the only other, one of my favourite
Stoke player.
No, that's that's right. I forgot. I would wiped that from my memory that he played for us. One of my favourite emails in that first summer, I thought, because I was just up for having anyone on, so I emailed Mark Bright because he was doing a bit of summarising, and obviously not. His allegiances obviously weren't Stoke, I knew that, but thought it would be interesting to have him on and see what he thought. And I sent him an email, and I just got this one-line reply, and it just said, "Hi, don't you know I'm a Vale fan, Mark?" And that was it. And he never... I replied and said, "Yeah, I do know, but I just thought it'd be interesting, da, da, da," and he never replied again. So, there you go.
Oh, that's lovely. And of course, one guest you did have on the podcast at one point was Pottermouth. Little did I know it was Clark Kent interviewing Superman at the time. But what made you do that?
Well, if I'm being totally honest, I was just trying to get more listeners. So it was the second season, or was it the second? I don't know. Was it the second season we'd been doing it? And Pottermouth was on. I was still phoning up Praise and Grumble because I phoned up Praise and Grumble the season we got promoted, and then I did it all the next season. I can't remember if I stopped doing it after that, but it was during that. Either that first or second season of doing the podcast, and I sort of did it as a bit of a publicity stunt because I thought it'd be a bit of a kind of coup to get Pottermouth on, and I even referenced it in one of my messages on Praise and Grumble that I was going to be like in Pottermouth saying it was going to be on a podcast called Stoke City, etc. So if I'm being very honest, it was shameless, kind of just trying to promote my podcast, and it was quite fun doing it. But it was actually the moment that John Akers from Radio Stoke, who was still the sports presenter and commentator on Stoke in those days, that was the point that he realised it was me, because I'd been in touch with him off and on since the promotion season, because I'd sent him an email saying, like, congratulating him on the coverage of that during that promotion season, and he'd invited me to go to the stadium and sit with him and Nige, and Dennis Smith was summarising that day, although I don't think Dennis Smith hardly spoke to me, but it's fair enough. And but I sat with them, and in my email to John Akers, I said also enjoying all the Pottermouth stuff. I can't say very much, but let's just say I have a relationship with him a little bit like Clark Kent and Superman. And he didn't mention it in his reply, but I assumed that was pretty obvious. But on the day when I met him, he didn't mention it, and it turned out he'd just totally gone over his head, and he just hadn't thought anything else about it. So then after that, we'd kind of stayed in touch and swapped emails every now and again, and I'd had him on the podcast as well. And then after that episode, I just got this email from him, and it just said, "It's you!" ! And he was like, "Your editing's pretty good, but it's not that good. I can tell it's you." So it was pretty funny.
Yeah. So my kind of relationship with Pottermouth then is I had no idea who Pottermouth was until the kind of battle cry thing went crazy, like viral. If people used viral in 2008, I'm not sure if they did or not. But I live in St Anne's in Lancashire, so I don't listen to Radio Stoke apart from that short drive from the Britannia Stadium to the M6. That's pretty much the only time I hear Radio Stoke. So very rarely listen to the Friday show, or I don't listen to all of Praise and Grumble either. So Pottermouth wasn't really something I was aware of until the promotion run happened. So what was the kind of idea behind this character? What made you want to ring up essentially a local radio sports station and where the voice of another character, if you like?
Yeah, so I'd in that promotion season, I don't know, I can't honestly remember exactly where the idea came from, but for a while I'd wondered about doing some kind of well, I suppose partly I was just very aware that often on football phone-ins, which I think were probably, I don't know if this is still the case, but I think they were a lot more significant sort of 10 years ago or more. Because I think now with social media and stuff, I think their relevance has diminished a lot. And if you listen to Praise and Grumble nowadays, it's mainly the same people who phone in, and there's a lot of texting and not a lot of, and often they read stuff off Twitter, and so it's quite different. So back in the olden days, I think they're a bit more relevant. And the thing that always used to happen was that you just have these myths developing. I always thought that people would either look back with rose-tinted glasses, or whatever the opposite to rose-tinted glasses is, about former managers or former players, and it was almost like, you know, if enough people said something, then it would just kind of stick. And around that time, so we just had Boskamp, and then Pulis had come back, and even that season, people were starting to reminisce about Boskamp, and it had only been like a season or two earlier, and like I was excited about Johan Boskamp for the first 3 or 4 matches when we played some nice carpet football and scored quite a few goals. Actually, up until the December in his reign, we were doing quite well, and then it all capitulated. But like, people just forgot that we were getting hammered at home, and that we were, you know, defending on the halfway line, and teams like Cardiff and Wolves, I remember sitting watching, just pick us off at the Britannia. And, you know, we'd get hammered like 3-0 or something. But that season, people were saying, oh, remember under Boskamp, it was so much better. And it's just nonsense. And I thought about like doing something to kind of send that up. And then because they started doing this answer phone thing, so they'd have the callers during the programme, but then there was also this thing that you could phone up at any time during the week to kind of express your opinion. So I just thought that presented the perfect opportunity to do sort of a comedy spoof character. So I did, and I'd been thinking about it for a while, and it was the night we played Scunthorpe, and we played them at Glanford Park and won 3-2, but we scored 2 late goals to win. And after the match, John Akers was like reading out texts from people and stuff saying, oh, if we've got any open promotion, we should be beating teams like this, and he was having to remind them that we had actually won the match. And I just thought, that's like, it's just typical. It's just like people making an argument, and there's no kind of basis to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, for, you know, as if you'd say, oh, well, if, you know, we're never going to get promotion if we can't beat Scunthorpe. You'd be like, yeah, no, we have just beaten Scunthorpe. Like, there's no. So it was just a kind of perfect. I was like, oh, I should give this a go. So that's what happened. And because it went down quite well that first time, I did it again. And the second time I did it, I made some joke about, because they just come out about the club had lost £3 million or something. So I made some joke about selling merchandise in the club shop, which John Akers sort of died laughing on air when he played it, and it sort of all went from there, and it kind of built a bit of a reputation, and it kind of, because he liked it, he sort of would start trailing it at the start of the show. So he'd sort of say, you know, tonight we hear from Tony Pulis and the other managers, and we also get the latest instalment from Pottermouth. So I think because it was kind of generating a bit of interest, they wanted to push it, and obviously that kind of motivated me to keep doing it and coming up with different ideas. And like at that time as well, it's a lot different than now. At that time, there was quite a lot of characters who used to phone up, like, you know, quite funny people, either intentionally or unintentionally funny. And also on that answer phone, there was a few other people who started phoning up, sort of doing, again, whether it was intentional or unintentional, just like bizarre things. Like this old guy used to phone up, because that season they started, was when Dennis Smith first started summarising for Stoke, and everyone went a bit doolally about it and how exciting it was. And this guy used to phone up on the answer phone and just chant Dennis Smith's Red and White Army just over and over again. And this other guy used to phone up pretending to be calling himself Painter Coates, and he did quite a good impression of Peter Coates, but it was a bit bizarre. Do you know? It was like this weird thing going
weird
on.
Little community.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it was funny.
When we're not on the air, you do have a chance to have your say. That's why we have Praise and Grumble 24/7.
Ready. Hi, John. It's Pottermouth here. Pottermouth. And I'm just ringing because I'm that sick and fed up with what's going on at Stoke.
We've got a new character. We like him. He's brilliant. Pottermouth, you can ring again.
He used to wear a lovely suit, Boscamp did, and I've got one. Obviously not from the shop because they never sorted themselves out in time. But I wear my Boscamp suit when I walk around Anley.
Sue said, is that Pottermouth for real? He is dead funny, really funny in fact, but never normal in a million years.
Well, as far as I can work out, John, he's grumbling about them as a grumbling. And now you've got me grumbling about the grumblers, grumbling about those as grumbled in the first place.
Praise and Grumble 24/7 on the way with Pottermouth. But first, Ian is in Scholar Green. Hello, Ian.
Alright, mate. Sound,
Good, I'm glad.
There's no heart and no fight. I mean, I know we've come back from goals down against Barnsley and Ipswich and Blackpool and Plymouth and Norwich and Scunthorpe and Charlton. But where's the fight, John?
Neil has texted in. He said, I think Ian in Scholar Green is Pottermouth.
No, he's not.
He's not.
He's not.
I'm going to continue in talking sense, but a different topic slightly.
Okay.
It's Pottermouth.
Right.
Pottermouth, I know he's anonymous, and perhaps not many people know who he is.
No.
I'm saying to you now, and this is no wind-up, he needs to make a CD, and he'd sell copies of that.
I mean, what can you do with Pulis? Sell replica baseball caps? You want to make much money with them? The only thing I can think they can do at the moment in the club shop is sell Peter Coates coats. I'd buy a Coates coat if it's out my club. Try. The message will be erased.
It's making me laugh even the second time hearing it. He's absolutely brilliant. Peter Coates.
I want to know, after last night's Praise and Grumble, are you on the lookout for Pottermouth?
Well, you know, his identity is a closely veiled secret, and I think it should remain that way.
I've got a theory. Do you think Pottermouth might be Pottermus?
No.
Oh.
That's a ridiculous idea. Let's get on with the non-league, shall we?
At Charlton, Stoke suffered a blow. The bubble has burst now, I know. It's over for Stoke. Promotion's a joke, and Tony Pulis must go.
Praise and Grumble 24/7 coming up with a certain Pottermouth. Kev's in Westbury Park. Hi, Kev.
It's not me.
It's not you, is it?
No.
Do you know who it is?
No. The jury's out on that one, John.
I know. It's a mystery, isn't it?
It is.
I have no idea.
Pottermouth has a Newcastle under Lyme accent. I'm good at telling where people are from. I would guess Chesterton, and that's from Pud.
What I say is, bring back the Boz. Bring back Boscamp. Because it was 4-3. It was exciting football. 4-3 every week.
I agree with Ian, actually. I think he ought to bring a CD out, that Pottermouth.
Hey up, John.
Yeah.
It's Pottermouth.
That's the kiddie.
Pottermouth, he is from Stoke but now lives away. I know this to be true because I work with him. All I can say is he's in the armed forces.
And the other thing I want to say, John, is that there's people phoning up asking, who is Pottermouth? They don't phone up saying, who is John Akers? Do they, John? And they want to know where I live as well. Well, I'm not telling you, but I'll give you a clue. Does Creswell live in Creswell? Try. The message will be erased.
Brilliant. Pottermouth this week's 24/7. I honestly don't know who he is. He just keeps ringing every week, and we love it. Thanks very much for ringing us again. I know a lot of people won't like him. A lot of people will love him. We love him. We're going to keep playing him. I'm sorry.
I don't think there's anybody else ringing in with such original sort of stupid comments, which they're damn funny. Let's face it.
And of course, the Pottermouth show will be back next Friday.
Absolutely, Steph. Thank you. One final text, John.
So before I get to the battle cry, then another thing you did, kind of alongside Stoke City, etc., when that podcast was going, was you produced a couple of like audio mixes, one of which we'll play at the end of this episode, of the one that captivates me and my dad is the one of the Cardiff City playoff semi-final, which is well, our listeners will hear at the end, but it's the commentary of that game kind of set to music, and it remains literally something me and my dad, sometimes coming back from the pub, will like play in the car, or coming back from the Stoke, we will play this commentary in the car because it's so good and so kind of, it does still make the hair on your arms stand up. So I'm guessing it's that kind of love of audio and love of radio that's kind of prompted you to make that.
Yeah, definitely. And I would have loved to have made that part of the podcast as well. That was one thing that I really wanted to do, but with all the rights issues and everything, it wasn't possible. But yeah, no, ever since when I first started getting into football back in the olden days, when Radio 5 was Radio 5 before it was 5 Live, they used to do these kind of mixes. And they were really good, and I remember some of them now. Like I remember one when it was like a retrospective thing on England's forlorn qualifying campaign under Graham Taylor, and they played "Everybody Hurts" by REM, and there was like the goals from Holland and San Marino, and it was amazing. It was just kind of like there's just something about it capturing. I don't know, like capturing the mood, but also adding something. Like I remember, like I had a tape of TV superhero themes, and I remember playing. I remember like I can't remember exactly how I did it. Probably just with 2 tape recorders, but like having the goals that I'd recorded from the '93 Cup final, I think, which was like Sheffield Wednesday against Arsenal, and playing the old. What was it? Incredible Hulk theme tune over it, which is this really melancholy piano music. And it's really weird because you've got dramatic commentary, like quite exciting commentary, and then this really kind of melancholy piano music. And it's just, I don't know, just that mix. It's like, oh my gosh, this is really weird how it does it. So yeah, so I've always been interested in that, and I've kind of tried to do different things. And that Cardiff Stoke thing, I tried a few times with a few like different bits of music and never really managed. And then I can't remember exactly. I think it was probably just getting slightly better editing stuff on my computer, and I decided to go back and try and do it because I'd got the commentary. I had a friend who used to record the matches because I've lived in Nottingham for quite a long time, and I listened to that match on a very dodgy medium wave frequency that sort of faded in and out of Radio Wales in Nottingham that night when we played Cardiff away in the second leg. And but I got a friend, the aforementioned Sheffield Wednesday fan who lived next door to me actually, who used to record the matches for me and then post the tapes to me in Nottingham. And so I'd got all the commentary and everything, and it was just a matter of putting it together. And I think it's one of the few that I've done. I mean, there's still the ending. It just sort of fades out at the end. There's nothing after the final whistle. It sort of just fades out, and it's a bit of a shame. But apart from that, it's one of the few that I've done that it kind of all comes together and it does capture it. And I think that remains for all the kind of Premier League experience and the FA Cup final and everything. That still. That match is my favourite ever Stoke match. And like you say about like listening to that and the hairs standing up on you wherever, like the hairs on my body always stand up on the end whenever I talk about it. And I think just because of where we were as a club and who we were playing, and the fact that it was like seemed like it was all over and we're going to be consigned to another season in the third tier, and just the way it all happened, it was just the most dramatic football match I've ever experienced in my life. And like I say, I was even, I was listening to it on the radio in a room in Nottingham, and those final few minutes of normal time with my mate who's a Peterborough United fan who'd wandered up from watching the Champions League final downstairs just to see what was going on. And it's just the best, most dramatic, most exhilarating, most unexpected, incredible football match I think I'll ever experience ever.
And what the mix does is you've got the added bonus of hearing those the Welsh side of the story, the Cardiff City commentators going, "Oh no way, is that a free kick?" and it's just the lovely kind of the contrast between the two. I mean, it's just like that's just sport and football and everything we love about it in 3 minutes or so.
Well, I got a friend who lived in Cardiff, so I asked him if he'd record it for me, which he did, and sent me it on mini disc. Can you remember those? And it was just, everybody thought that was it. Like after that first, we played him at the Britannia, and they were winning 2-0, and it was like all over, and it was so deflating. And Kavanagh or Thorne scored, and the fact that they'd signed our two best players at the start of the season, and then right at the end, was it Dion Burton just kind of snuck one in right at the end to make it 2-1?
Yeah.
But no, absolutely, they were. And when you listen to the commentary, they just knew that was it. They were there. There was no question. No, they'd beaten us at our place, and then you got this crazy partisan crowd in Cardiff, and it's just. And even afterwards, one of my favourite interviews I ever did on Stoke City etc. was with Neil Cutler, who was in goal for us that night, and he talked about them arriving on the bus and. Stuff being thrown at the bus, and then he just said in that match, and I think it's always just amazing, I think, when you hear players say things like this. He said he was standing in front of the Stoke fans, and he just said when those goals went in and he could see the Stoke fans just going absolutely mental, he just said, I just wanted to run and jump in with them, and it was amazing, because it's that, like I say, it's hard to express. And my sister and my mum and dad were at the Beanback at the Britannia that night, and my sister always says about how just up until that first bit of commentary in the mix, when we're losing and it's the last minute, and they've just clapped off whoever their striker was who was wandering off, and Sam Aman had always done that thing where he walked around the pitch just before the end, and they were all getting ready to invade the pitch, I guess, and celebrate. And my sister says she was just standing there next to my mum and dad, and she was just praying that Stoke would score. And she said and she was I remember telling me years later that she was just praying and saying to God, no, just do it for my mum and dad, just do it for them. And saying, because they're getting old and they might not see much success again. And she said when the goal went in, she couldn't celebrate. Everyone stood up and was going crazy, but she just said she just stood there and felt like she was going to collapse, and she felt like her legs were going to buckle. And it's just that. Yeah, it's more than, I don't know. It's just the best, isn't it? It's the most dramatic and most beautiful, unbelievable, night of football I think I probably will ever know.
Yeah, and in that you've got the phrase "do it for," which brings us neatly onto the battle cry. What brought about the battle cry, and I get that the character was something you'd been ringing up Radio Stoke with for a while, but did part of you think when you were composing this poem, essentially, did you think, oh, this will be something they'll really enjoy, this will be something they have a laugh with, or did you think, oh, this could gain a bit of kind of local notoriety or something?
No, not well. I just thought it'd be fun, and I thought it would be. What did I think? It's hard to remember. I thought that. I think for quite a long time I'd thought about the idea of like using poetry as a like ahead of some World Cups on the BBC or other radio stations. You sometimes hear like pieces of audio, and occasionally they'll use words or people do some kind of poetry or speech from Shakespeare or something, and sometimes it kind of works and often it sounds really terrible and cheesy. But I'd thought sometimes about like composing something ahead of like a big match, but I suppose you just think, well, like how would that ever work? Or and towards the end of that season, because we went on this really bad run, I just thought, well, maybe I could write something and it'd be quite funny, because Pottermouth was this kind of obviously very niche and only people who listened on a Friday night would know about him. But I just thought it kind of was an opportunity to do it, and it's sort of slightly funny because it's in this comedy old man Stoke accent. But yeah, just so I guess I thought hopefully it'll be like a bit of a hit, just like some of the other things I did made people laugh. And the most I ever hoped for was with anything was if it got meant, if all the callers referenced it, or if like John Akers laughed or something, or if someone posting on the Oatcake referenced it, then that was always kind of quite satisfying. And also I had this group of mates who I used to record the bits with Pottermouth on and then email them, and they were mates from school and uni and stuff, just about, I don't know, maybe a dozen people, and it was just like a bit of an in joke. So yeah, but I did, that was it really. I hoped that it would go down well, as the other little comedy things had.
And how did you decide like what bits of Stoke-on-Trent to put in there? I mean, how long did you spend putting it all together, do you think?
I think I probably thought about it for quite a while. I say quite a while, maybe a week or so. Just like thinking as I was wandering around or doing other stuff, I just kind of think about different things. And when I sat down to write it, it kind of came together pretty quick, really. Perhaps, like I say, I can't remember, but not long, like maybe 20 minutes or half an hour. And I suppose I was just thinking of like everything that meant Stoke to me. And some of it I had to Google just to double check, like, I don't know, like references to like Limekiln Bank, for example, which I wasn't really sure about, and I just heard it on a old Grandad Pigott record, and just double checking names of like Josiah Wedgwood and things like that, because it'd be a bit embarrassing if I got that wrong. I mean, I listened to, when I listened to the documentary, it struck me that on it says, take us to the Premiership. I mean, that's very embarrassing, isn't it? Referring it to as the Premiership. But maybe people thought that was, I don't know, no one's ever mentioned that, but I only just picked up on that the other day. Yeah, it all sort of came together, and I suppose I just thought of everything that I could think of that either my dad had told me or that I'd heard, or that was kind of, that summed up what Stoke was all about. And for me, it was kind of that, because football for me is all about, and supporting Stoke, it's kind of who you are and it's your heritage, and that it's much more than, you're not just cheering on 11 players. You are part of something. You're part of this kind of thing, this like thing that's to do, for me it's always been, I guess, about my identity, where I'm from, my family, my grandparents, the road that I used to skateboard up and down when I was a kid, and the school that I went to, and it's like that. So cheering goals and supporting your club, and it's that whole thing to do with identity and the essence of who you are and where you come from. And so that's why you kind of list all those things, because it's like that's what makes it all up, really.
Yeah. And then of course Radio Stoke goes kind of national for at least a week, probably more so during that kind of last few games as Stoke kind of claw their way to promotion. I mean, when did you first become aware that this kind of this thing you'd recorded had gone so massive?
Well, the next day, so that night, I can't remember loads, but that night, I can't remember what happened. Like, I listened to Praise and Grumble that night, and it kind of went down really well, and like people were kind of so way more than anything that I'd ever done before. Like, people were texting in afterwards because they really hyped it up. So at the start of the show, they said, you know, you're going to hear something very special from Pottermouth tonight. And they did the 24/7 answer phone thing earlier in the show, but they left out, they just kind of played a tiny bit of my intro to the battle cry, and then they played it later in the show, and then towards the end of the show, and then after that, there was just loads and loads of people texting in saying like all this stuff about it. So it was great, and it was really exciting. But then the next day, like early in the afternoon, my mum phoned me and she said, "Oh, Radio Stoke are playing Pottermouth every hour," and they were playing it on the hour every hour in the build up to the Coventry match, and then they played it before the Coventry match. So it was just bonkers then. And then later that week it was on 5 Live, and I was in touch. So there was one guy at Radio Stoke who knew Rob Adcock, who was did various bits and pieces. He knew it was me. And so he emailed me sometime that week just saying, "Oh, it's all gone a bit crazy. 5 Live have been in touch and Midlands Today have been in touch." And he was really committed to keeping it a secret, so he didn't tell anyone else it was me. But yeah, it was just insane. Like, it was on Drive. Drive did a feature on it on 5 Live. And then it was on Midlands Today. Then they played it on Sport on 5 that Friday night, and you had like, it's just it was just the bonkers nature of it that you had Mark on 5 Live doing Sport on 5 for like, I don't know, 2 minutes or 3 minutes. You had Mark Pugach, the presenter, Steve Claridge and Gabrielle Marcotti talking about this thing, and it was like, it's just incredible. And like Midlands Today at the end of their thing, at the end of their feature, were like, "If you know who Pottermouth is, please call this number." And it was really, really just insane. And then also around that time, like Bristol City like did their own, and Hull City did their own as well, and they were both terrible, like awful. Like the Bristol City, I can't remember the Hull one at all, but the Bristol City one, they got I think Radio like Bristol did it, and they used the same music, and they got Gareth Chilcott, the rugby player, to do it, and it was just terrible. Like, it didn't scan properly, and and he kind of couldn't really read it very well, and so, but it's just all added to the absolute kind of bonkersness of it all.
Championship side Stoke City, who are getting ready for this weekend's crucial home game against Bristol City, their promotion rivals, have been given a boost by a mysterious fan.
And a call to arms has come from a mystery local poet calling himself Pottermouth.
Chief Executive of Stoke City is Tony Scholes. He's very good, isn't he?
I think it's fantastic. I heard it for the first time last Friday evening. And this is an area that's rich in tradition, very proud of its heritage. And I think the poet Pottermouth has caught that very well.
But for sporting passion, you just can't beat the Championship promotion race.
This is a call to the men who wear the red and white. Do it for the Stokies around the world, near and far. Do it. Do it purely.
Across the UK.
This is 5 Live Sports.
The message will be erased.
I've heard that a couple of times. Everyone says, well, they say two things. One, it just shows football. And everyone else goes, Slash? Really? From Stoke? They all say the same thing. We looked it up, didn't we? Born in London and lived in Stoke till he was 11.
But Bristol City have responded with their own version. Here is their battle cry, read by the English rugby legend Gareth Chilcott.
The combine wheels have stopped turning. Old Harris stored that plough. The Prems have got enough teams from the Midlands, from London and up north. It's time the West Country babbers showed the country what we're worth.
Now, compare Arsene and Avram's cryptic nihilism with the galvanising words of Pottermouth. Who is Pottermouth, I hear you ask? Well, truthfully, I don't know, and nor perhaps does anyone save Pottermouth himself. For months, Radio Stoke have had mysterious messages left on their answering machine by someone adopting the name and clearly besotted with Stoke City FC, a.k.a. the Potters. But with his team just outside a slot for automatic promotion to the Premier League, Pottermouth made a call to arms and a call to Radio Stoke so stirring it was also played over the tannoy before yesterday's crunch match against Bristol City.
Stoke on the brink of the Premier League in 2008 away at Colchester. Honest answer, how many times have you watched or listened to Pottermouth in the last 24 hours ahead of this game?
Honest answer, 4. Twice on the way here. We stayed over in Braintree last night and listened to it on CD coming in today. Sad person that I am, but there you go.
The honest answer was 4. How many times have you listened to it secretly that your wife doesn't know about?
No comment.
Then Tony Pulis hung it in his office.
Yeah, that's crazy. I remember John Akers telling me that, like, I don't know, the next season or something. And, yeah, I mean, that's the thing where you kind of, if you're not a footballer and if you're just a fan, then I suppose you hope, you have an affinity with your club, but you kind of, I suppose more than anything, you sort of want to play your part. And so for, like, most of us, obviously that just means going to the games and shouting and clapping and, you know, you being there and you go through the thick and thin and all of that kind of stuff. And I suppose for me, the most miraculous thing and joyful and satisfying thing of the whole experience is that I was able to do something that sort of in some weird way kind of perhaps had some kind of positive impact, and you know, you kind of played your part. And so as someone who grew up, like I was late, like I say, I was kind of an Arsenal fan for a bit and then came to Stoke and never felt totally, you know, as an insecure teenager. My mates at school who weren't even Stoke fans always questioned my loyalty to Stoke, and they're like, "Oh, I thought you were an Arsenal fan," and all this kind of stuff. Like even like years after sort of renouncing my commitment to the Gunners, and so it's just remarkable that sort of all these years later, when we did finally reach the promised land, I did something that sort of, for some people, will kind of be associated with that, and that Tony Pulis has it hung up in his house. It's really, like I say, it's hard to explain. It's bonkers and it's really brilliant, and just feel very grateful to have been able to do it.
And why the reveal now then? What prompted your outing as Pottermouth?
Well, John Akers got in touch and said that he was thinking of doing a documentary because it was 10 years on. And he said you can either do it as, like, you can either come out and reveal yourself, or you could do it anonymously, and we could interview you as Pottermouth. And I just thought that it would have been, I decided a while ago that I wasn't going to do anything else. Like, I occasionally get asked to do things. So Radio Stoke asked me if I'd do something when they were doing the City of Culture bid, and I just thought, I can't do anything. I mean, there's been some bizarre requests over the years, so I don't know if it was sometime after that Crewe were in a relegation battle. I don't know if you remember this, and Gudjon Thordarson was the Crewe manager, and so I got this email from Rob Adcock from Radio Stoke, and he said, listen, you probably won't want to do this, but I was trying to get Gudjon Thordarson on the podcast, like do an interview with him, and I think I'd probably got in touch with Rob Adcock to ask him about that, and I don't know. Anyway, he got in touch with me, and he said you probably won't want to do this, but it might help you to get Gudjon on your podcast. But basically, he's asked Radio Stoke if there's any way that they could ask Pottermouth if he would do a battle cry for Crewe to keep them up.
I just love the thought of a professional football manager just like get me that guy off the radio to record a poem for me, and that'll keep us up.
It's bizarre, isn't it? Like, where do you start with that?
I like good job, but bloody hell, if that's his tactical now, so I'm kind of glad he went. Oh dear me. Oh.
So kind of different people had asked me to do things, and I'd done a few things that I kind of regretted. Like, nothing serious, but there was a few kind of things that, like, I don't know, around the cup semi-final, like, people say, oh, would you get, could we have Pottermouth doing a few words on this or that? And anyway, so I hadn't done anything for years and years and years, and then this last season, there'd been a few people had been in touch with me saying, who knew it was me, saying, oh, loads of people on, like, social media or whatever, or on message boards are saying, oh, why doesn't Pottermouth come back and do something, and we need him to do something. And I did actually, towards the end, I can't remember when it was, a few months before the end of the season, I did sit down one afternoon and try and write something, but I couldn't do it really. I couldn't think of much to say that was very positive about where we were at, and I sort of felt we were doomed since probably the Newcastle home defeat. So I didn't really feel like there was much chance anyway. So it just felt like a good opportunity to come out and tell the story and say it was me. And yeah. So, and it's been lots of fun doing so.
And off the back of that, of course, you've got the Crystal Palace game where you were kind of unveiled to the crowd kind of before kick-off, and I wasn't sure what quite was going on, because I thought it was literally in the seconds up until kickoff that you were handed the microphone. I thought, is he literally going to do the whole thing? Because I'm not sure that Crystal Palace will be up for waiting for the whole 4 or 5 minutes. So how did that come about?
Yeah, well, it was all very bizarre. So that night, so the radio station did the documentary the night before, and then I was on the phone to John Akers like afterwards, just kind of chatting about the show and sort of saying how good it was, and because he sort of told me bits and pieces about it, and he'd sent me a few clips of it, and so we were having this conversation. He quite likes doing impressions of Pottermouth, so often when we speak on the phone, we both talk as Pottermouth to one another, which is quite bizarre. And anyway, we're on this conversation, and then he said, what are you doing tomorrow? This is like at 10 o'clock at night. And I said, oh, well, I've got the kids, so we're going to go to the cinema, and I'm going to make sure we're back in time to listen to the match. And he was like, oh, right, only Steve Buxton, he's like the main MC on the pitch. He said, Steve Buxton's just texted me and said, can you get me Pottermouth on the pitch before the match tomorrow? And I was like, and I was kind of racking my brain to see how we could do it, because my kids are adopted, so there's kind of extra issues around like anxiety and doing stuff out of routine and all that kind of stuff. So I sort of said, well, I think if my sister's free and if she could meet us there, then she could help me look after the kids, and that would probably work. And he was like, oh yeah, no, they'll just say exactly what you need, because they'll send you a car to get you and everything. I was like, oh really? Anyway, so it was as late as that, and I just thought, and he said, oh, they'll probably just play the battle cry on the speakers, and then he'd probably just get you to wave at the crowd. And I was like, oh, all right, yeah, that sounds great. And my kids I'd never taken them to a match before, so I thought, be a good opportunity. So yeah, so this car came and picked us up and drove us all the way to the stadium, met my sister. We went in and introduced ourselves at like the desk, and it's like the executive entrance, which I'd never been in before, and like we're standing there, and it's kind of saying, oh, we're here, Steve Buxton's asked us to come, it's about Pottermouth, and these ladies on the desk are a bit like, oh right, and like one of them said, oh, phone such and such, and then there's people around you going, Jack Buckland's left us 6 tickets, and they're like, oh yeah. Anyway, so it's all very surreal. And then we got taken down to the pitch, to the dugout. So I'm sitting in the dugout with my kids who've never been to a match before in their lives. They're 5 and 7, sitting in the dugout, and my sister's there, and then Ricardo Fuller like wanders along, and they introduced us to him, and I was like, oh, you were one of my favourite players. And I just didn't know what to say because it's like Ricardo Fuller, and he said, oh, you're amazing. Oh, the battle cry. Oh, what you did for us. I don't know. When I always do an impression of him, I always do it in a French accent. I'm not quite sure why. And so he just kind of went on about it. He said, he said, Pulis played us any given Sunday, which was good, but for anyone who wanted to know what it meant for Stoke, it was your poem that really helped us. It was amazing. It was so good. And I was like, oh, that hat trick against West Brom. Oh, and he was like, no, and yeah, it was bonkers. And then we had our photo. It was amazing. And then Steve Buxton came over and he said, all right, nice to meet you. He said, and it was funny because I met him once before and he obviously, like, I don't know why he would remember this, but in the early days of Stoke City, etc., like after we'd been doing it for a couple of months, I got invited to go and meet him at Stoke, and they'd released a podcast at the start of that season, which was awful. It was like terrible, and it was a kind of mixture of interviews, and Nigel Johnson sort of presented it, and they did. Did you ever hear it?
Yeah, I've got a vague recollection of the club trying to do something. There
was like
a couple of months after you guys, and we're like, I know I was kind of frustrated at the club for even doing it. I was just like, let Stoke City, etc., do their thing. There
was like this never-ending interview with Adrian Lewis, the darts player, who sounded like he wasn't really into Stoke anyway. But anyway, so I got invited to meet the media team at Stoke, and they basically offered us to become the official podcast, for Stoke. And he said, we can get you can use studios at Radio Stoke or Signal, you can have access to players and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, oh, can we have commentary clips? Because going back to that whole thing. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. Of course you can. Anything you want. And I was like, oh, right. He said, I said, the only thing is we often interview people from the media who the opposition media. And he was like, oh, right, yeah. Obviously we wouldn't want you to say anything sort of negative or critical about the club. And I was like, oh, right.
There's the rub.
Yeah, so I sort of went away and thought about it, and then phoned him up a week or two later and said, thanks, but no thanks. Which is a decision I sometimes wonder whether I should have or not, but I don't know. It's probably...
I've thought about what we would do in a similar thing, and if we wanted to interview someone from the club, or if we wanted any kind of official recognition from the club in whatever way, and I've always thought we've got to be kind of honest. As a fans podcast, you've got to try and just speak your mind, and you can't be Pravda for Stoke City Football Club, really, can you? So
definitely, definitely.
I think you made the right decision anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, so he comes up and he says, all right, Nick, nice to meet you. He said, you're right, we're going to do this straight after the players come out, just before the handshakes. Are you all right to just give us a few lines? I was like, and he's like, just, a line or two. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah. So he wandered off, and then, the other thing that's quite funny at this moment, which I only found out a couple of days later, was that this guy came over then, another guy from the, I don't know what you call them, the press team or the people who are in charge of what's happening on the pitch, which is all kind of massively precisely done. So the guy standing next to me, as the players are coming out the tunnel, he was doing a sort of 10-second countdown. He was like 10, 9, 8, 7, and as he said 1, the players stepped out of the tunnel, and I was like, oh, is it all that precise? He was like, absolutely. I was like, oh, it's all do you know what I mean, down to the second. It was kind of quite impressive. Anyway, while all this was going, while I was chatting to Ricardo Fuller, one of these guys came over to my sister and said, are you staying for the match? And she was like, yeah. And he was like, oh, right, where are you sitting? Have you got tickets? She was like, no. You've asked him to come, and like you've asked him to come. So, and he was like, oh right, okay, bear with me. So he like wandered off, and then he came back and said, yeah, the match is actually a sellout, but we have managed to find you 4 seats just over here. So it's like remarkable.
Good move, Stoke. Yeah. Oh, that's
anyway,
typical Stoke, I think.
So I was completely oblivious to this. So then I got led over by Steve Buxton just before the kickoff, and he said, we'd go over to the Britannia, and he'd introduce me, and it was just bonkers because the delay on the mic is like, it must be 4 or 5 seconds. So he started like speaking into the mic saying, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Nick Thorley with us today, who was revealed as Pottermouth last night. Well, I could hardly hear anything he was saying, and then it started booming out the speakers. And I just remember thinking, I'd sort of decided on a few lines that I was going to say, but I just remember thinking, I'm going to have no idea like how loud to do it or not, or how close to have the mic to me, or... So in the end, I did it, and then as soon as I finished, I just thought, oh no, I've just yelled down the microphone. That must have sounded terrible. And I spent the first half, probably the first whole of the first half, just kind of texting friends saying, did you hear it? Was it all right? Did it sound terrible? And I phoned my mum and dad, who were like listening at home, and spoke to my dad, and I said, oh, could you hear it? And he was like, yeah, I could hear you scream something. And I was like, oh no. I was like just thinking, oh, how embarrassing. But so it was all very bonkers. The main thing was, though, like, I wouldn't have ever lived with myself if I'd have turned down the chance to like wander out onto the pitch at Stoke. And the fact that they came and picked us up and brought us back home, and it was like my kids' first match, and they really enjoyed it, and like are up for going again next season, and it's kind of really helped their understanding of football. Although my son, who's 5 now, for him, Crystal Palace are like the benchmark of like football kind of glory, which is very weird. And I'm sure like in later life I'll enjoy kind of sort of repeating this back to him, but now I'm trying to like explain to him about the World Cup and how it's going to work, and he was asking who the best teams are in the world, so I was like saying, oh, it's Germany and Spain and Brazil, and he goes, are they as fast as Crystal Palace, Daddy? Like, yeah. Yeah, they probably are as fast as Palace, and perhaps a bit faster. So bizarrely, Palace are sort of the benchmark of a really great football team now in my little boy's head.
I love the fact we made Crystal Palace look that good on that day as well.
He kept saying, Daddy, why are they so fast? Why don't we have fast players like them? Good question.
It is a question we've been asking on the podcast for about 98 episodes now, so that is perceptive. I'll let you go in a minute. There's just kind of one listener question I wanted to give you. Going back to your love of radio, your love of following football on the radio. From Topher Knowles, which commentator, local or national, does the best job of painting a picture of the beautiful game?
Well, so for me, football commentary has always been a lot to do with passion as well as painting a picture. So I want to know what's going on, but I also want the person I'm listening to if I've got an emotional investment in the game, I want them to be emotionally involved as well. So for me, the best commentators, I mean, there's loads that I can mention, but my favourite, like of all time, on the radio would currently would be Alan Green. I think he's like brilliant and also very opinionated and stuff. But probably of all time would be Jonathan Pearce. And I don't really listen to him much like when he does his telly work, and he only occasionally it pops up on 5 Live now. But back in the day when he was on Capital in London, and sometimes for World Cups, their commentary would be carried by other local radio stations, like commercial stations. Like, he'd just go ballistic. And a lot of people would think that was like unprofessional and stuff. But like when England score in a World Cup, I go ballistic. And for me to, like when I've celebrated a goal and gone absolutely crazy, and then you listen back to a commentator sort of talk about it in a very deadpan kind of way, it just doesn't do it for me. So, and plus Pierce has always been brilliant at like painting a picture and also bringing lots of knowledge and stuff to the fore in those commentaries. So nationally it'd be him, and then locally the best local radio commentator of all time is Graham Richards, who was on Radio Derby up until, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. And he interestingly, he was a magistrate in Stoke, so he always had quite a lot to say about Stoke and a lot of knowledge. But if you go onto YouTube and listen to Graham Richards like classic commentaries, he was the same, like the kind of is kind of he was very, very opinionated. So he would say some pretty outrageous things, but he'd also go pretty crazy when Derby scored. And his diction was amazing. Like his sort of like way with words, and the words he used were just remarkable. So yeah, they would be my favourite commentators of all time.
Nick Thorley, Pottermouth. It was an absolute pleasure to speak to you. This interview has been a lot of work behind the scenes, shall we say, went into this. It was a lot of hassle, but definitely worth it. And hearing your love of Stoke and your love of audio and stuff is just like it's music to my ears as well. And it's just been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Oh, nice one. Thank you very much, David. It's been a joy and a pleasure. And we enjoyed it so much the first time that we decided to do it again. So it's been great. Thank you.
At Ninian Park for Cardiff City's most important game of the season so far, the Nationwide League playoff semi-final second leg. Cardiff City against Stoke City. The prize at stake tonight, a date at the Millennium Stadium on May the 11th.
Just looking out there, Richard, you know, the place is packed. This is a fantastic sight to see Ninian Park like this. The scene is set, you know, it's got to be Cardiff City. It just has to be. There's no other result. It's got to be.
All dead, all the dreams we had. And here come the two teams led by referee Mike Dean of Wirral. And here go the fireworks. Cardiff City led out by Graham Kavanagh in their all-blue strip. Stoke City in their red and white stripes and white shorts, led out by Peter Handyside. The Bluebirds leading 2-1 after the first leg. Gudjon Torderson, the Stoke manager, said after the first game on Sunday, the pressure would be on Cardiff City. The pressure's on Stoke.
I think he's just trying to take a bit of pressure off his players, Richard. Of course the pressure's on Stoke. Got a goal down. They've come to a hostile atmosphere. Full house at Ninian Park. Probably the one place you wouldn't want to come to play a second leg of a playoff game. But they're here. Let's see what their bottle's like, because I know Cardiff will be up for it.
Of course I don't believe you're dead and gone. You can hear the applause for Robert Earnshaw as he comes off with 1.5 minutes of normal second half time remaining. He applauds the crowd, they applaud him back. We move towards the close of this playoff semi-final second leg. It's 0-0 on the night, and Cardiff City lead by 2-1 on aggregate.
Stoke are going like trains towards the penalty area. Clark's closed down, he's cutting infield. He's going inside left channel, he's putting in his cross, that's a good one. O'Connor tries to get a head on it, brace for Gudjonson. He puts it back, and Stoke have scored! Oh, Stoke have scored! It's James O'Connor who's put Stoke one each. The ball put in by Gudjonson, and James O'Connor has put the ball into the net in the 89th minute. And the Stoke fans are bouncing up and down. McCullerton, Stoke City are in front. Cardiff 0.
They're all ecstatic. They're all ecstatic.
And it's level pegging. Graham, what's it like at the Britannia?
What's it like, Nigel? They're on the pitch. The Stoke City supporters are on the pitch, and what a man to make the cross. The manager's son, Bjarne Gudjohnsen, James O'Connor. Game on. Stoke are still in it.
God, I can't believe that. Cannot believe it. That's come from nothing, absolutely nothing. Well, it's all they say about these playoffs. My God,
it's absolutely electric here. The Stoke fans are with me. One or two are in the crowd. Are Stoke going to win, lads? Do you think Stoke are going to win now? Come on, City! You can probably hear it. They really think that Stoke have got the advantage now, scoring that.
Handy side, long ball forward, headed away by Pryor. And the referee has given a free kick to Stoke right on the edge of the Cardiff area for pushing by Pryor.
That's no way is that a free kick, no way at all. Dion Burton was backing into him, Spencer Pryor, that's why he put his arms up to say, look, I'm not fouling him.
It's Staniuk, Clark and O'Connor. O'Connor left, Staniuk more central. It's Clark, it's O'Connor, and it's in! It's taken a deflection from James O'Connor's free kick, and the ball's in the net.
I think it hit O'Larry. I think it hit O'Larry.
It hit O'Larry. It hit O'Larry. The free kick from O'Connor hit O'Larry and has gone in the net. And Stoke City, with 6 minutes remaining, are in the lead as Cardiff try and come back. 2-0 to Stoke. 3-2 on aggregate. As Stoke have got to defend, as Kavanagh's battling to the ball, the byline, gets in his cross. Oh, and Fortune West had a chance at the far post, and he's headed wide. As the whistle's gone, and Stoke City are through. What a performance from the Potters. 2-0 on the night. 3-2 on aggregate, and the players go over to their 600 or 700 supporters in that Grange end, and the supporters just cascade forward towards them. What a performance by Gudjon Thordarson's men tonight. They can stand proud because they've come here into a cauldron at Ninian Park, and they have taken a worthy victory that has moved them to the Millennium Stadium.